Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this PechaKucha event. My name is Stephen Joseph. I'm trustee and chair of the Foundation for Integrated Transport. The foundation was set up about 10 years ago now by Dr. Simon Norton, and it is his, who sadly died in 2019, but it is his vision and his approach to transport as a basic right and transport and tackling climate change that we are using his funding to work on. And the foundation does what it says on the tin. It promotes integrated transport projects. This event is an opportunity to hear from the voices of some of the various grant recipients and fellows who are leading the charge for sustainable transport. PechaKucha is a simple, quick-fire presentation style. Each presenter gets 20 slides that are 20 seconds each, meaning it is both easy to produce for the presenter, easy to digest for the audience, and most importantly, it saves everyone from boredom, and no one's PechaKucha talk can drag on for too long. So, without more ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, who is Alistair Kirkbride, who will talk about visitor and leisure transport governance. He is a Foundation for Integrated Transport Fellow from 2020, who's worked on transport governance in national parks, led to a broadening of scope to consider governance of visitor travel in rural areas and market failures, via a Churchill Fellowship in 2023 on decarbonising the whole visitor journey. Alistair.
Thank you, Stephen. Do I have to say go?
I think you go.
Excellent. So I'm going to be talking about visitor and leisure travel, so a slightly different species of transport because people don't have to do it particularly. I'm going to be talking about governance, which some people say is boring, but I'm going to have to say it's a story as to how I found governance interesting. It is a story, and there's a spoiler in that I think we can be optimistic. So visitor and leisure travel, choose your outcome. It's a long-standing problem with car congestion in visitor areas. There's lots of reasons why this causes problems: visitor experience, perhaps, social exclusion, impact on other services. It became very clear to me that we were writing too many reports that were filling shelves, and not a lot of this was sticking. So Elvis Presley got it about right. I've modified his lyric. And so part of the question that I was asking was, what do we do to make a lot of this stuff stick and have impact? We did get money. For instance, we got 7 million quid of money into the Lake District. We got a 14% shift. So people will change behaviour, but traffic also went up, and the impacts were lost after a couple of years. So how do we make really good ideas stick? It isn't through want of good ideas. First part of optimism: visitors want change. They want managed access to busy places at busy times. Residents want public transport. They all want reduced traffic in these areas. So it's not like there's opposition to these sorts of ideas. We just haven't cracked how perhaps we get them. And they will change. I visited Ghent. I've written about Madrid, all these cities that have gone car free, and people are quite happy with it. Penny Pass in Snowdon is a great example where really well thought out interventions means that people are quite happy when they're asked to behave in a slightly different way in these places. Since lockdown, though, I think there has been a shift in expectations from visitors. So the Daily Mail's now laughing at congestion. The Telegraph is writing about why you don't need a car to visit the Lake District. Serves you right. The press saying, if you come and have your car towed, well, it's your fault, really. So there's just this real change. So to Julian Glover, who wrote a review for DEFRA on national parks, and one of his conclusions was all about governance of transport. And therefore, I'm suggesting that governance is he suggested governance needs looking at to make sure that transport sticks at scale. He was talking about national parks. I'm going to talk about three things: travel to these places, which is where all the carbon sits, national park visitor transport, but also transport in localities, so much smaller scale stuff that should become clear. This diagram's from my Churchill Fellowship that I'm sure is linked somewhere in these slides. Travel to. So about 260 million people visit national parks and national landscapes a year, which is about the same as pass through the UK's airports. But airports are pretty organised in terms of managing how people get there. Where is the equivalent advocacy for visitor destinations in the UK? We look at headlines. Oh, right, moved on. Oops. So, for instance, it's almost impossible, for instance, to get a coach to a national park or a national landscape in the UK. This is just not where services go to. The rail system is pretty much at capacity, certainly for peak visitor times, and they tend to do all that nasty maintenance at weekends and bank holidays when visitors want to travel. When we get to national parks, Julian Glover basically pointed out that until we crack governance, we're not going to crack transport. He was arguing that national park authorities are pretty well placed to organise how transport should work in these places, rather than their transport authorities, which is not dissing the transport authorities. I developed this using a FIT fellowship, asking questions: who should be involved in governance, what are appropriate structures, but what are the appropriate powers and abilities that should be brought into a lasso around the national parks themselves? Bus services, highways, enforcement. What would a local transport plan for a national park look like? And this can be done. Cornwall is showing that in rural areas, transport can be organised differently. The Bus Services Act allow authorities to design and manage bus services in a different way. The next generation of local transport plans provides opportunities to think, what would that look like for a national park? On a third scale, I travelled Europe last year, and one thing that came out was that places with really good transport tend to manage these things at a valley scale or a locale scale. This is the Jungfrau in Switzerland, split down into different valleys. The Tyrol has 34 different areas, each of which have their governance structures. So in the middle of this, what's the governance structure? Visitor businesses and communities coming together. They collect and they manage revenues and capital funding from different streams to work out what needs money spending on the right. In Zermatt, they even advertise to visitors, pay your visitor tax because you get this out of it. We have a structure in the UK that we can use, a legislative structure. It's called business improvement districts, normally applied to urban areas, but there are tourism versions of this, often in regenerating coastal destinations, but not completely. So we have the structure that allows this local governance to happen in the UK. Also in the UK, in the last couple of years, the valley scale is getting organised. So Travelling Light, Hope Valley and the Peak District, funded by Foundation for Integrated Transport. More recently, Ullswater Valley, Langdale Valley, they're all getting organised with community interest structures and other ways of setting up structures that allow them to get organised about their transport. Back to this pesky idea of revenues and visitor tax. Manchester's now charging for it. Scotland has legislation. Tourism tax the Lake District could raise 17.5 million a year. My blog in the bottom right there said, great, but for what? Are we confident enough at saying this is what really good visitor transport looks like? So I've covered three things. One, I think coach services are getting organised, so that needs work, but there we are. Two, I'm not sure national parks are quite ready yet for really taking on this. But three, reasons to be cheerful. Part three, Ian Dury and the Blockheads. I think the valley scale is the scale at which exciting things are going to happen. Phew, was that 20 seconds per slide? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alistair. We'll go straight on to Jeremy Leach from Action Vision Zero, which is talking about his Vision Zero 2 programme of reducing motor vehicle dominance and traffic harm. Jeremy has campaigned for a fairer balance between people and motor vehicles for more than 15 years, with Southwark Living Streets, more recently with London Living Streets, and he's been the London campaign coordinator for 20 is Plenty for Us. Jeremy.
Go, thank you.
Go.
Stephen, thank you very much, and thanks very much for inviting us to take part in this event. So my name's Jeremy Leach, and we're going to be looking at the advocating work that we've done around Vision Zero, roads policing and traffic justice, and the huge support that we've had from the Foundation. So Vision Zero follows the approach of rail and air industry. So a number of other industries that believe that that death and serious injury on those methods of transport is not inevitable, and that's certainly the case with roads. The approach we take is called Vision Zero, but is actually road danger reduction, reducing danger at the source where danger comes from, which in this case is motor vehicles. The traditional system of road danger reduction Vision Zero has been based around the SAFE system: safe speed, streets, vehicles, behaviours, and then post-collision learning and justice. We believe you have to add less traffic to that. It's a core part of what makes a difference and can reduce casualties significantly. The work that we do is threefold: supporting campaigners at a local and a national level, working with local and highway authorities across the UK, and then roads policing, enforcement and traffic justice, trying to make sure that deterrence is effective in reducing the amount of traffic harm that occurs. The Foundation's been hugely supportive of us since we began in 2019. There's 4 people involved in our organisation, principally on a voluntary basis and part-time basis. And this is an area that most funders are not particularly supportive of. Road safety is much more about, you know, keeping supporting the work that the road safety organisations do. Reducing traffic is not part of that to any significant degree. The work that we do is largely based around, is promoted by our website, where we have all our blogs and briefings, and then a Twitter account, which has been slow to grow, but has more than 1,000 followers now. We promote all our work on there. So first of all, working with campaigners, we cut our teeth really by supporting local campaigners in the 2021 Metro Mayor election. As you can see from all the logos there, we got sort of really lovely coalitions of groups in those local areas together: West Midlands, West Yorkshire, Manchester, Liverpool City region, all working around Vision Zero in those areas. We have monthly meetings with UK-wide road policing campaigners, and also in London we have a specific group, about 12 people in each, that talk about Vision Zero campaigning in London. And then obviously whoever wants it will provide localised and a local customised support to them. There's a presentation that we did in Haringey in London. Working with Transport for London on London work, really advanced policies in London around Vision Zero Action Plan, updated in 2021 with the progress report. London's target, a bit behind at the minute, but great work's been achieved, is of 0 fatal and serious road casualties by 2041. Working closely with the Greater London Authority and TfL, meeting with Will Norman, the Walking Cycling Commissioner, and with the policy teams from the GLA and TfL. Part of the stakeholder groups around Vision Zero on policy and policing. And as you can see in the bottom, we made a presentation to the GLA Transport Committee. And following on from that, really updating that is policies around strengthening Vision Zero in London, which we've just sort of concluded in the mayor elections that have just completed. And 3 policy areas, and this will be fundamental to any Vision Zero work: reducing speed, reducing traffic, and reducing levels of danger. Quite excitingly, away from the sort of urban environment, Oxfordshire County Council have embraced the idea of Vision Zero, and encouraging there too is the fact that it's part of reducing traffic's part of the work they've done. We've been part of a wide stakeholder group that they put together, and we're contributing to the report they put out in January this year. We've made numerous consultations. You can see just a sample of the strategies we've commented across the UK on here. I think what we'd say is that a lot of these strategies default to education rather than infrastructure change, reducing traffic. And it's a real case of trying to say it's more than just education. Looking now at roads policing, enforcement and traffic justice, we find there's an excessive focus by campaigners on sentencing. For us, detection is key around deterrence, and more enforcement's needed. Trying to influence police and crime commissioners, and in London working on a specific serious collision investigation. And then some fantastic work that my colleagues Amy Aaron Thomas and Victoria Lebrecq have done is bringing together a lot of information that's out there and putting out briefing papers that no one else has done yet. Here's some topics such as around hit and run, underreporting of casualties, and then testing the strategies that people have been putting out. And again, there's a myriad of statistics available from diverse sources: Home Office, Ministry of Justice, where all this data is put out by the MOJ and Home Office, but it's not brought together into a narrative. And we brought the story together around speeding bans, motoring offences, roads policing, and a number of other areas. And just in London, we've had a really encouraging investigation by the Greater London Authority Police and Crime Committee recently into the quality of serious collision investigation, which is a big issue in London. And Amy and Victoria spoke, as you can see, at the committee hearing in November 2023 and contributed to their recent report. I'd say all of the work that we do is in partnership. We work really closely with others, such as cycling campaigners at a local and national level, pedestrian groups, part of Living Streets, other campaigners such as 20's Plenty and Cyclox, and we're a member of the Healthy Street Scorecard Coalition. So huge amount to do with other groups. What have we learned? I think we've learned we struggle to get engagement from larger organisations. We've reached out to them more. We need to improve our contact with cycling walking commissions. We're trying to do that, improve our communications and graphics. And hugely and significantly is we're hoping there might be more interest in this area from a potential new government. So in conclusion, more places are taking Vision Zero approach, but policies are often remain weak. A default to road safety education. The FIT funding has really allowed us with Vision Zero 2, as Stephen mentioned, to be a voice for road danger, but bring together some of these themes in a broader concept. So the idea of road danger reduction, linking to climate change policies, linking to well-being and public health. So bringing these all together in a much more broad coalition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Moving straight on, I'm going to Elspeth Ray, who is the head of enterprise at Transform Scotland, which is the National Alliance for Sustainable Transport in Scotland. And she leads the research and campaigns to cut traffic, reduce emissions, and increase investment in sustainable travel. And we'll talk about the work they do on tackling traffic. Elspeth, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Go. Yeah, hello. I'm greetings from Edinburgh. Transform Scotland, we're the National Alliance for Sustainable Transport. We're the membership organisation of over 70 organisations, from grassroots, community, campaign groups, all the way up to multinational transport companies, local authorities, universities, and everybody in between. I'm going to be talking about car traffic reduction. In Scotland, we're really fortunate because we have a government target, which is a 20% reduction in car kilometres by 2030. That target was set in 2020 as part of Scotland's climate change plan. And we'd say it's great that we've got a target. We really welcome it. It's great that the Scottish Government recognises that traffic is a key driver of climate change. And having this target means that we're able to have conversations with business groups, for example, about how we can cut traffic in Scotland and help to combat climate change. Unfortunately, however, all the trends are going in the wrong direction. So like the rest of the UK, travel has increased consistently over recent decades and is forecast to continue increasing. So we're just not getting the reduction that we need. And the trend is continuing to go in the wrong direction. This is much like a lot of other climate change policy in action in Scotland, with the exception of energy. We can see that bold targets are not met by action. And recently, for example, a couple of weeks ago, we saw that the Scottish Government abandoned its overall climate change target, which ultimately led to the resignation of the First Minister, falling out with the Green Party, etc. A lot of the government's policies are focused on very much on behaviour change campaigns, on investment in public transport and active travel, which we welcome, of course. This is an example of a recent campaign that we launched last month to encourage people to walk more. So we do think those kind of approaches are important, but ultimately what we're not seeing is the deep-rooted structural changes which are needed to cut traffic. So firstly, we're not seeing the price incentives for driving are still encouraging people to take the car. So we're not seeing things like national road user charging. And secondly, what we're seeing is that investment, so where's the money being spent, is still being spent on unsustainable transport infrastructure. And that's what I'm going to focus on for the rest of my presentation. We recently launched some work in this area, which I'm going to summarise. So what we did is we decided to look at spending on the city region deals in Scotland. These are agreements between the Scottish Government, between local authorities and the UK government on major projects. Together, they amount to £4.6 billion worth of spending, including £1.3 billion on transport infrastructure. However, what we found is that over 70% of that spending is being spent on high carbon infrastructure, so primarily road building, so high carbon road projects. And we found that only 29% of the total, which is 382 million, is being spent on sustainable and low carbon transport. So the city region deals huge amounts of money, and what could be a transformational approach to transport investment is actually still going on the same old thing, so primarily new roads and bridges. We also found that despite the huge sums of public money which are being spent, the decision-making process is really intransparent. There's little meaningful consultation. It's not clear why some projects are chosen over others. There's been no environmental impact assessment or climate change assessment of the overall transport spending. And we then had to use freedom of information requests to get information on how much money was being spent, how decisions are being made, and where that money is going. And even after we'd sent loads of freedom of information requests to local authorities, some of them still couldn't provide us with information on their budgets. Delving a little bit more detail, these are the 6 city region deals in Scotland. We found that in 2 regions, in Inverness and Highland and in Aberdeen, 100% of transport spending is going on high carbon, unsustainable transport infrastructure. And some other examples in Glasgow, so the biggest deal, over the 100 million in Edinburgh is going to a new roundabout. So that is most of the money in Edinburgh. We've got 151 million for the Cross-Tay Link roads near Perth, which will provide for a large increase in capacity for vehicle traffic. There are some good examples just to show how the money could be spent. So this is Stirling, where they're spending all of their money, which is £28 million, on improving the active travel network. So that's great, but that is also the smallest deal, only £28 million that are going to Stirling on these types of projects. Another good example of how the money could be better spent is in Glasgow. They're spending 139 million on the City Council's Avenue projects, which aims to cut car dominance in Glasgow city centre and make it better for people who are walking and cycling. So some positive, but overall we found that rather than taking this opportunity for transformational change in spending in our cities, what people are continuing to spend the money on is the same old road building projects, which of course generate more traffic and lock in those kind of travel behaviours for decades to come. So overall, we have made several recommendations to the Scottish Government. We're calling them to review their funding priorities and halt new road building projects, to carry out climate change assessments of projects, to increase the transparency of spending, and finally to invest in sustainable transport and active travel that is accessible to all, such as the Edinburgh Trams, which is an initiative that we are 100% behind. Thank you very much. That's me. If you've got any questions and want to follow up afterwards, then please do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elspeth. Great presentation. I'm moving straight on now to Claire Haig from Greener Vision. Claire is the founder and CEO of Greener Vision, which is a not-for-profit organisation dedicated to encourage the switch to a greener future. She's also Executive Director of the ZEMO Partnership, formerly the Low Carbon Vehicle Partnership, and chairs the Delivery and Impacts Independent Review Panel for the Government's Joint Air Quality Unit. And away from transport, Claire's also an artist motivated by the desire for positive change. Claire.
Thank you, Stephen. Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, has warned us that climate breakdown has begun. Last year was the world's hottest year on record, but emissions continue to rise. Climate change is an existential threat that we have become strangely accustomed to living with. Transport is the fastest growing source of global greenhouse gas emissions and the biggest polluting sector of the UK economy. Increased road traffic and larger vehicles have largely offset any improvements in fuel efficiency. Technology alone won't be sufficient to reduce emissions. Einstein once said, "The definition of insanity is making the same mistake over and over again and expecting different results." The current approach has achieved very little progress in 30 years. We won't reach net zero with cleaner vehicles alone. We urgently need to reduce traffic on our roads. We must travel less and switch more from car to public transport, walking and cycling. We must reduce energy demand, price properly for carbon, and ensure a fair and just transition to net zero that works for everyone. Taken together, these will require a radical shift in terms of how we think about decarbonising transport and our whole economy. To quote Einstein again, we won't solve our most urgent problems from the state of mind that produced them in the first place. Greener Vision has recently applied insights from a creative project spanning 30 years to the climate crisis. The Tabular project seeks to provide a new perspective on the mind, firstly by examining current thought patterns, then clearing the mind, and finally building a new framework for thought. In applying this to the climate crisis, we must start with an honest appraisal of the assumptions underpinning our decision-making. Our current paradigm is not fit for purpose. We need a radical realignment of how we perceive ourselves in relation to each other and the environment on which we depend. Our society and its main structures originate from a time when the individual was understood to be separate from the world we inhabit. We have developed economic systems that unsustainably plunder resources, degrade our natural capital, and widen extremes of wealth and poverty. We must identify and remove the biggest barriers to progress. Too often, we treat the symptoms rather than the causes of problems. Curing congestion by building more roads leads to induced traffic. The result of repeated failures of road taxation is that we drive too much. The biggest barriers to progress are political, not technological. There is an assumption that electric vehicles will enable us to decarbonise transport and continue our current lifestyles. We need an honest conversation about the changes we all need to make in our own lives. So what are the foundations of a new paradigm that would enable us to rise to the scale of the climate challenge? We need to move from treating people as consumers to treating people as citizens. Solutions are more likely if climate change is understood as a collective problem. We need to connect more deeply with our natural empathy and our respect for each other and all living species. Our approach should seek to create unity rather than division. So Greener Vision proposes that climate policy should be underpinned by 5 key pillars of unity. 1, the unity of the biosphere. 2, seeing the whole picture. 3, integrating heart and mind. 4, healing the whole system. 5, recognizing that we are citizens of one world. When we forget that we are embedded in the natural world, we forget that what we are doing to our surroundings, we are doing to ourselves. We need to create fairer and more equitable economic systems that allow both humans and the environment to thrive. We must strive to see the whole picture and demonstrate greater honesty and transparency. What are we not seeing? What are we choosing not to see? We are part of the problem if we persist with the illusion that business as usual will achieve net zero. We need to engage our emotional brains in climate change. Rational scientific data too often loses out against a compelling story that speaks to people's values, and better integration of thoughts and feelings would also improve our decision-making. We must seek to heal the whole system. We need to address the root causes of climate change, our addiction to fossil fuels. We are using too much energy to fulfill socially constructed needs and desires. we must embrace a whole system transition. We are citizens of one world. We should seek to promote intrinsic values that go beyond narrow self-interest and to foster the understanding that protection of nature is protection of our very selves. Climate change is one issue that could bring us together and help us overcome our historic decisions. So if we're going to change behaviour, we need to change how we think. Our world is fragmented, disordered and chaotic. Anthropogenic climate change has been allowed to grow like a cancer with the potential to destroy the world as we know it. This is where our current thinking has got us. I am eternally grateful to FIT for their support. This year, Greener Vision is running a series of Pillars of Unity events to explore how we might embrace more holistic thinking in tackling the climate crisis. To find out more or to sign up to attend one of our events, visit www.greener-vision.com. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. I'm moving on now to Jamie Hassel, who's the Executive Director of the Parliamentary Advisory Council for Transport Safety, or PACS. And he's a seasoned road safety professional who brings a wealth of knowledge, experience and contacts to the role. And he'll be talking about the What Kills Most on the Roads report that FIT funded a year or two back. Over to you, Jamie.
Thank you. If we can start, please. So I've been in post for about a year now, and I've read a lot of the reports that PACS has done, and this one had the most impact on me. So what kills most on the roads? So looking at data differently helps us understand things better and come up with sort of new strategies that can be found to resolve the issues. So PACS is unique. We're a charity. We've been around for 40 years. We cover air, rail and road safety. We've got close links with Parliament. We're membership funded, but we also get sort of grants and sponsorship. But we're independent of that, so we can provide sort of evidence-based research and policy recommendations. So why is this important? So there's a government strapline, which is, you know, we have some of the safest roads in the world, but still we have 1,700 people die each year. In the last 10 years, that's stagnated, and the 10 years before that, it halved. So, you know, work can be done to improve this. So the way the current data is presented comes across as almost victim blaming. So we have vulnerable road user groups. You know, these are the ones that are most likely to die on our roads. And, you know, the fact that we call them vulnerable road user groups is part of the issue that we have on this as well. So, you know, why is walking so dangerous? Well, walking isn't dangerous. The problem isn't that pedestrians aren't wearing sort of RoboCop-like outfits to keep them safe. The problem is other road users. And like I said, about calling them vulnerable road users implies almost like it's their fault, whereas actually we probably should be calling sort of harmful road user groups. So who kills who? So if we look at this, the first three groups are more likely to be killed. Cars is about 50-50, and the last three groups are more likely to kill than be killed on the roads. So, you know, it's important to see that actually, you know, pedestrians don't do much harm. Now, if we look at the data by distance travelled, we start seeing some very interesting things. So for me, what stands out is things like vans. So vans kill the most people per mile travelled, followed by light goods vehicles and heavy goods vehicles. So we've got an issue with commercial vehicles. So the Health and Safety Act basically says that companies shouldn't hurt others in undertaking their business. Yet we've seen from the evidence that actually commercial vehicles cause more harm per mile travelled than any other form of transport. So we've got a problem here. So what's really important is how you die. You know, what form of transport? If you go by air, rail or boat, there's an investigation branch, you die, so they learn from it. These two examples, both these drivers died following their vehicle overturning. One of the companies was fined nearly £500,000. The other one, probably no action taken. So health and safety, they report on every work-related death apart from those that happen on the road. So you could see 135 workers were killed. Fall from heights were some of the biggest reasons, and 68 members of the public were also hurt. But When we look at work-related road death, the figure is about 560, most of these being members of the public. So we have a real issue here. And also, so about a third of fatals involve someone driving or riding for work, and 39% of pedestrians, it's estimated, were hit by someone who's working. So we know that companies shouldn't cause harm on the roads, but we have a problem. They are. You know, this is who kills who, and vans sort of stand out there. Yeah, so why are vans so dangerous? Well, they don't have the same safety features as cars. There's no special license and training to operate most of them. They tend to be heavier and sort of loaded more than cars. There's no restriction on drivers' hours compared to sort of lorries and some other forms of transport. And they tend to be younger drivers. So private roads and other sort of smaller minor roads, is where pedestrians are more likely to be. So why do they kill so many? Well, their natural environment, shall we say, is on the motorway or a big dual carriageway. Their natural environment isn't on a country lane through the middle of a town or village. So they're not designed for it. So the design of lorries seems to be based on where they do most of their travel, not where they cause most harm. So Transport London is sort of leading the way on this. They've improved the visibility of lorry design, but most still have the old design, which means that they've got very poor visibility around them. So, you know, I'd much rather be standing next to a newer version than an old. So Transport London are doing great work in this area. They have a Vision Zero, which has sort of been talked about before, and they've got a number of policies and strategies aimed at improving road safety, including for commercial vehicles. So commercial vehicles should be doing this, but they're not. So what happens if we have more cycling and walking? Well, it's good for people, it's good for the environment, and an increase poses very little risk to other road users. So it's something that we should be working on, although we do need to keep an eye out on sort of newer forms of transport. So considerations for scooters and high-powered e-bikes are sort of potential concerns for the future. And then, so because of this report, PACs have taken a sort of renewed interest in, or a new focus on work-related road safety. And this is an area that we feel that actually can make a real difference in road safety over the next couple of years. So we have a focus on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jamie. A very interesting presentation. And I'd now like to move on to Amy Earnshaw-Blake from the group Eco Attractions. Amy is responsible for the day-to-day management of Eco Attractions, which works with members to develop campaigns, funded projects and partnerships that help raise environmental awareness and promote the purpose, vision and missions of members who are leisure attractions with a particular eco and sustainability approach. And she's going to be talking about the Good Travel Project, which is a particular interest to our founder, Simon Norton. Amy.
Hi, everybody. All right, let's go, Brogan. So thank you for inviting me. I'm Amy Blake, and I am the Executive Director of Eco Attractions. Actually, I have the pleasure of being the Executive Director of this organisation. It's a membership organisation which comprises of many of the UK's leading visitor attractions with a strong environmental focus. And our vision is to see people coming together for a sustainable future. Some of our members include the much loved and hidden gem environmental visitor attractions, including the Earth Trust, the Eden Project, the Living Rainforest, Holcombe, Centre for Alternative Technology, and the National Botanic Gardens of Wales. Some of our past collaborations have included the Good Travel Programme, Good Travel Project Phase 1. We've also worked on Project Pollinate, and we've worked on the Nature Playlists. So our purpose is to talk to the people, to the visitors. So we're a really people-focused organisation. We want to understand what's motivating the visitors to come to our attractions. Phase 1 of the Good Travel project saw 10 members of Eco Attractions take part, and we had 3,000 responses. We were trying to understand how people were visiting to our attractions. So we have a collective visitor total of about 4 million visitors, and we wanted to understand how they were getting there. Of course, they were coming by car, around about 90% were coming by car, but we asked them, do you know if there's an alternative transport available? 67% said no, and we asked them, if there was an incentive, what would encourage you to come car-free when visiting us? Excuse me. And actually, we also asked them for other thoughts around what would improve their ability to visit us more sustainably. So they talked to us about a park and ride scheme. They talked to us about bike parking, being able to hire bikes. So we thought, okay, let's go back through this. Let's go on to phase 2. So with phase 2, what we're trying to do is really delve into the data that we got in phase 1 and do a deep dive with each of the different attractions so that we can really get under the skin of why people are unable to use public transport to get to their attraction. So the organisations that we've worked with so far have been the Earth Trust, the National Botanic Gardens of Wales, Gilbert White's House and Gardens, and the Living Rainforest. So we've so far carried out a deep dive into these different organisations to really understand in more detail how we might make an impact. So the Earth Trust, we have spoken to them about their plans for the future. They're looking at redesigning and improving the educational impact of the Earth Trust, and they're looking at how they might encourage more people to use public transport. We've talked to the Living Rainforest. Again, they're looking at increasing their visitor numbers, doing a large capital build. And as part of that, they're looking at how they're going to network in with walking routes, with bike routes around the environment of the Living Rainforest. We've also been talking with, Gilbert White's. So Gilbert White's house has a huge focus on its own sustainability. However, its location in Selborne is very, very difficult to reach by public transport. And so we've been looking at how we might be able to raise awareness of when bus routes are available, when and how you might be able to walk or travel by train and then hire a bike to get to the Gilbert Whites. The next stage is to work across the membership with the other organisations, which will include looking at the Eden Project, Holcombe, the Centre for Alternative Technology and the National Botanic Garden of Wales, and we'll carry out the same deep dive with those members to work with them, to support them to set their own targets as to how they will help their visitors to understand how to find the public transport that they'll be able to get them to there, and also to reduce or to provide alternative means of transport. We'll be working alongside Good Journey, and they were going to be working with us to deliver some workshops or webinars to the organisations themselves. So internally with their staff to look at how they can support visitors that come by public transport, and also to look at talking with communities as to how they might be able to embrace or encourage them to take on public transport to visit these attractions. We know that a lot of the groups that come to us are school groups, so we'll be working with them to educate the young people around the benefits of taking public transport. And central to this is going back to the slide at the start, which was to look at we want to take on board the comments that we had from our visitors. So we need to understand what it is that they have told us and what they have told the attractions are going to help them as individuals. We're looking at, with a design agency, looking at with some friendly promotional materials which are accessible to the public. So we're public facing, so we need a campaign which is going to be embraced by the public. So we're working on developing some concepts at the moment around about the creatures that you saw on the slide before. And then we're going to create a dedicated landing page on our Eco Attractions websites, which will list each of the attractions and exactly how you can get to them by public transport. We'll be collaborating with Good Journey on this as well. We'll then be able to look towards World Car Free Day in September and run some educational workshops and events. So this will be at each of the different attractions, each of the different participating members, and there will be specific tailored workshops and events for the public to try to encourage that sort of shift in mindset away from using the car and onto public transport, with the culmination of the programme ending on or around about World Car Free Day in September, where we're going to run a flagship event at the National Botanical Gardens of Wales and also separate events at each of the different attractions. We really hope to see you there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I should say that Good Journey is also a previous grantee of PIT, so we're glad you're working with them. I'd like to move on to Patrick Utz from Como UK, who's going to be talking about the shared transport vision for England and Wales. And Patrick joined Como UK as its research manager in 2022 and generates insights on why people share cars, bikes and other transport modes. And he works with shared transport operators, local authorities and others to help grow shared transport and to recognise its social, environmental and economic benefits. Thank you, Patrick.
Okay, thanks a lot for the introduction, Stephen, and thanks for the really interesting previous presentation. Okay, then let's go. All right. Yeah, thanks again. As it was being said already, I'm Patrick Utz with Como UK, and we got funding from FIT to work on a shared transport vision for England and Wales, which is based on a previous project that we have done in Scotland. As well, looking into the full potential of shared transport. So what is shared transport? It is basically a way to use a mode of transport without having to own it. So this can take the form of car clubs, bike share, shared e-scooters, or ride sharing, all of which gives you the opportunity to move around without having to own a car or a bike or a scooter. Now, why do we need a shared vision, or why do we need a vision for shared transport? First of all, because shared transport is more sustainable. We know that users of car clubs, for instance, drive more and make more conscious decisions about when to get into a car. And it gives very low-key access to cycling, which is also then more affordable because you don't have to either own a car or a bike. And it also makes you decide more consciously about when to use it, which overall is mostly cheaper than actually having to buy a car or an e-bike, for instance. It is also more inclusive because we see that people who use bike sharing, for instance, tend to be the ones who benefit from it the most are people who have constrained mobility, who are struggling to afford to buy their own bike. So it gives you very low-key access to very innovative forms of mobility. Now, why is there a sort of a long-term vision? Why is that necessary? Well, we see that there is 77% in England and Wales own at least one car, but only 45% use it on a regular basis. So shared transport can help to use the vehicles that are on the road much more efficiently. And we get to that vision by looking at the census data from 21 and combining it with the long-standing research that Como UK has done on shared transport to develop an idea of its full potential overall. And what we find is that if everyone, for instance, who could use a car club would use a car club, we would see that over 7 million households could use a car club instead of using their own car. That's about 30% of the overall population in England and Wales. If we think about that, almost a fifth or more than a fifth then all car club users then get rid of their car that they own privately, that results into a reduction of 1.5 million cars on the road, which is a queue of 7,000 kilometers the distance between London and Miami. So that's the amount of cars that could be taken off the roads if everyone who could use a car club would use one. We also know that these people then drive less, which would result in almost 1.8 billion car kilometers per year, or the equivalent of 300,000 tons of CO2 equivalents that are emitted every year because those cars are being used less, but are being used much more efficiently. Now, if everybody who could bike to work who's currently driving would do so, we would see a reduction of 10.5 million car kilometers per working day. And this is because we know that there is around 12.5 million people commuting per car every day in England and Wales. But over 5 million of these commutes are shorter than 5 kilometers. And these are also trips that are over the critical mass that we could use for bike sharing, which is about 10 trips going back and forth between the same locations. If we think that these distances where bikes and e-scooters could come into the equation would be longer than for just pedal bikes, we can see that the network of trips, which is on the right-hand side, is much more intense, and the number of trips would grow even further up to 8 million. The same is true for ride sharing. When we think that people who get into a car together can do longer trips, it also would take a higher critical mass, but we see that over 3 million commutes every day could be done by ride sharing rather than single occupancy car trips. So now we have talked about all these sort of huge numbers, and now what do we do with that vision? Should we go see a doctor, or should we rather focus on that stony path ahead of us and actually try to get to that vision and enable the potential of shared transport to develop its full impact? Now, I think we should use this vision to streamline shared transport at various levels of governance, as we have heard earlier. One thing that's necessary is a top-level change in terms of the funding streams where shared transport needs to be thought of as an inclusive part of a wider sustainable transport mix. This needs to come through at the sort of intermediate local level or regional level, where local transport plans need to think about shared transport as a key part of the mix when it comes to spatial planning, to transport planning, and these have to be thought of in much more integrated ways. This will then result in changes in physical infrastructure, where sort of the last mile that we see is an issue with many public transport trips can be done by shared transport, and when these modes are brought together, for instance, in mobility hubs. And of course, we need also behavior change. So people's hearts and minds have to be one to get them out of their cars and to think much more systemically about how to do trips in a more sustainable way, where the true costs are also taken into account. And bringing shared transport into that more sustainable mix can be one way of doing that. So for the way ahead, let's stay focused on that vision. It will be a slow and gradual path, but anyone who wants to join us on that journey, please do get in touch, and we'd be delighted to share more insights on shared transport with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. And I'm now going to move on to Mayor Bain from Stop the A38 expansion campaign. Just to say to people listening, there will be a bit of time for questions and comments at the end. If you want to post those, we'll endeavour to take them later. So Mayor Bain works for is going to talk about the A38 expansion campaign. She works as a science communicator and has volunteered with various environmental and human rights campaign group, and she helped launch the Stop A38 expansion campaign in Derby, which is where she lives. Mayor.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to start. Go. Thanks. Hello, I'm Maya. Thank you for inviting me. I work as a science communicator, but I volunteer with a campaign that is trying to stop the polluting and destructive A38 Derby Junction scheme by National Highways and Department for Transport with a legal challenge. So in 2019, a friend told me that these green spaces near where I live were going to be destroyed by a government scheme to widen a dual carriageway I already knew other local people concerned about climate, nature and sustainable transport, so we got together and launched the Stop the A38 expansion campaign. These are some pieces of artwork I've created to try and draw attention to the natural beauty of the areas under threat of being destroyed and tarmacked over if the road expansion happens. The big tree featured here is a veteran oak tree, which is alongside a historic Ramblers walk called Bonnie Prince Charlie Walk. But it's not just about protecting green spaces and nature in my backyard. In 2019, Parliament and my local council declared a climate emergency. And then I find out this road expansion scheme on my doorstep is still going ahead. A lot of climate action to cut emissions is very complicated, but this is simple, just stop it. People are suffering and dying from the climate crisis impacts right now, primarily in the global south. By 2070, scientists predict that over a third of the world's population will be exposed to unlivable heat and humidity. That's billions of people who have to migrate or die, and pointless high carbon schemes like the A38 are contributing to those deaths. I'll now explain some of the scheme's negative impacts. The graphic on the left shows National Highways vegetation clearance plans. 11 hectares of woodland will be cut down, with only about 6 planned for replanting. And on the right is the 300-year-old veteran oak tree, which is under threat from the scheme. Myself and a friend climbed the veteran oak tree to tie a fabric banner with elasticated cord around it. I learned to climb trees as part of the campaign in case the legal challenge is unsuccessful, so I can occupy the trees and prevent them from being felled. I'm willing to risk arrest and even prison for peacefully resisting the destructive plans by the government. So the scheme will increase carbon emissions, both through construction and by increasing traffic. National highways and planning documents show this. Transport's the highest emitting sector in the UK, with very little progress made on reductions. Building and expanding roads to facilitate more vehicle miles only worsens the problem. Many expansion advocates claim it will reduce congestion, but planning documents state the scheme's main purpose is to increase capacity, so nearby greenfield land is unlocked for developers to build more unaffordable, car-dependent sprawling estates on, which will ultimately lead to more traffic. The scheme is estimated to cost 250 million in 2019 and is probably more now due to inflation and rising construction costs. Our campaign group is also calling for the A38 expansion to be scrapped and the funds redirected into sustainable transport investment instead. We've been running our campaign as volunteers with our own money until FIT gave us a grant in early 2021. We still have some of the funds left, and they've helped us hugely over the years with awareness raising and marketing materials, especially for our legal challenge fundraisers. We've used some of the funding on website hosting, adverts in local magazines, a short film, and hired someone to create social media content and run social media advert campaigns. Our social media is usually run by volunteers, but it's been really helpful to be able to hire someone when we've been fundraising for the legal challenges. We've also used funding on printed materials like banners, posters, and leaflets, which we deliver through doors and use on outreach stalls at events. And we've also bought a card reader machine, so it's been easier to accept legal challenge donations at in-person events. So I'll now talk about some of the impacts of our campaign. In 2021, we managed to stop the scheme with a judicial review legal challenge. The then Transport Minister Grant Shapps admitted he acted unlawfully by approving the scheme as he failed to properly consider the cumulative impacts of the increase in carbon emissions from the scheme. This was also because we engaged with the examination process. There was then a redetermination process, which we engaged with again and sent in more objections. And then after a long time with no news, another development consent order was granted in August. So we've launched another legal challenge, which is actually, and our court hearing is next week on the 14th of May. Our campaign has generated a lot of media attention locally, including a lot of debate, and has opened up conversations about transport planning, biodiversity, and the climate crisis. We try to counter a lot of ignorance and misinformation, as many people haven't read the planning documents and falsely claim the scheme will reduce pollution and be good for the environment. As we've managed to stop the A38 expansion so far, it should have actually opened this year. The council is reviewing their local plan and is reconsidering how the city grows without depending on the traffic capacity from the expansion. So it's looking more at brownfield sites for developments and sustainable transport solutions in the city instead. We've also managed to save thousands of mature trees and wildlife sites. Protecting existing trees is a vital part of climate action as they absorb more carbon, provide more flood protection, shade, food and habitat to wildlife and more, while saplings will take decades to do that if they even survive. Our campaign has also built community and managed to reach people who wouldn't usually engage with environmental and transport campaigns, as their air quality and area of natures are under threat. The A38 has become an issue many locals object to. We've held many gatherings and community events to raise awareness and celebrate our local green spaces. Finally, we're still raising funds for our legal challenge. This time our main ground is the scheme's economic assessment. The Secretary of State granted the development consent order with an out-of-date economic assessment and BCR calculation, which we believe was unlawful. So please donate if you can, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Maya. A great campaign which we've been happy to support. I'd now like to move on to Carolyn Axtell from the group Possible, Carolyn is the Parklets campaign manager at Possible, and she leads efforts to empower Londoners in reclaiming their streets from car dominance, and collaborates with various groups to transform parking spaces into vibrant parklets and advocates for parklet permits across all boroughs. So she's going to be talking about parking policy as a climate solution. Carolyn.
Thanks for the introduction, Stephen. Okay, ready to go? So firstly, why parking policy? We know that every car journey starts and ends with a parking space, and parking policy has a key role to play in reducing carbon emissions from transport. Parking policy is an underutilised but powerful lever to reduce car trips, traffic and car ownership, creating more space for people and fighting climate change. But in practice, it's generally used as a tool to manage parking demand or generate revenue, rather than as part of the transport decarbonisation solution, even by councils which have declared climate emergencies. So Possible teamed up with CPRE London to develop their parking policy benchmark into an online tool to assess all of London's council's parking policies through a climate action and traffic reduction lens. And Living Streets and Wheels for Wellbeing provided feedback on the tool. I should also mention that the parking policy benchmark builds upon the recommendations of the 2020 Centre for London report, Reclaim the Curb, which is about the future of parking and curbside management in London. And in London, parking policy sits firmly within the remit of local councils. So the policy context for local councils' parking strategies is that the local implementation plans set out how each London borough will meet the objectives of the Mayor of London's transport strategy. And boroughs' local development documents also have to be in general conformity with the London plan. And that provides the strategic framework for housing, planning and so on. So the parking action tool is aimed at residents, campaigners, council officers, council members, anybody really with an interest in how parking policy can be used for action on climate change and car dominance. In terms of how the tool works, what we did was to create a framework by grouping those 10 policy areas that you see there into 10 sections and identifying the key policies that we wanted to see in each category. And the more policies a council had in place, the higher their score in each category. So a council's overall score is their average across all of the categories. So what kind of things were we looking for? Things like emissions-based charging, a policy to install electric vehicle charging points in the carriageway rather than the footway, parking controls on housing estates, prioritising accessible parking for disabled drivers, removing parking, tackling pavement parking, Also reallocating curbside for sustainable uses, putting a surcharge on additional resident permits, except for disabled drivers, discouraging pavement crossovers, and providing cycle parking for non-standard cycles. So those are just some examples. Obviously, there are many more questions than that, which you can see if you go to the tool on our website. So we assessed each of the 32 boroughs using our parking action tool, and these are our findings. We found a really wide variation in results. The slide will come up in just a moment. So the scores ranged from as low as 7% to as high as 61%. And overall, we found that many councils were effectively talking the talk, but not walking the walk. So lots of in-principle support for action on parking to tackle climate emissions and air quality, with councils repeating aims from the transport strategy in their implementation plans. But most of them were failing to translate that into actual policy. So few councils use parking policy to achieve their air quality and public health targets. A few of them did reference the transport hierarchy you're probably familiar with, that prioritises active and sustainable travel above motor vehicles. But many of them didn't actually reflect this in their policies on curbside use. So what you can see there is a similar hierarchy around use of the curbside. For example, many of them were giving out free electric vehicle permits, whilst also charging over £100 for cycle storage. And in some boroughs, the annual permits for petrol cars are still cheaper than cycle hanger spaces, which is obviously not what we want to see. As you might expect, some councils base their policies on purely financial costs without any regard to considerations like climate or air quality, whereas some councils do consider those climate, health and social impacts when they are setting their policy. So we've got an example there between Hammersmith and Fulham and Lambeth around how they charge for the cycle parking. So lots of outer London boroughs scored low and many scored 0 on things like accessibility, reducing parking and all of those things you can see on the slide. But some boroughs did have a diesel surcharge, emissions-based charging and allocating curb space to car club vehicles in outer London. There was encouraging progress on supporting the switch to electric vehicles, and Haringey was the best of the outer London boroughs. Some boroughs are leading the way, like Lambeth, with their curbside strategy, great objectives like places to stop and rest on every street, drop curbs at all junctions, 10% of the curbside being permeable, and planting trees every 25 metres in the highway. Hackney has led the way with its community parking policy, and others are now following suit, enabling residents to repurpose those spaces. But overall, councils need to do much more. Not a single council committed to making electric vehicle charging points accessible to all drivers. Very few acknowledge the need for parking policy to be fair to non-car owners, and very few exploring things like workplace parking levies. So we're calling for all London councils to commit to allocating 25% of their curbside to sustainable uses, more controlled parking, especially on housing estates, car-free housing developments as the norm, and improved parking policy in outer London boroughs, but obviously in tandem with improved public transport. So we're going to be soon publishing a map of our findings of those results. You'll be able to see that on our social media and through signing up to our newsletter. And we'd appreciate, obviously, any shares to help us to circulate that. And if you want to give the Parking Action Plan tool a go, that's the link there on the slide, wearepossible.org/parking-action. And it's a good tool to use if you're based in rural areas with densely in urban areas with densely sort of populated areas. And that's me done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. A really interesting project. And we're now moving on to Jerome Sewell from Unique Talent, who's going to be talking about the Roll Safe project that we've funded. Jerome is managing director of 2 companies, one called Unique Talent, which assists young people from gang-hit communities, where he heads their media and film department, and the Sustainable Transport Department, Roll Safe, and Jerome's going to be talking about that. Thank you, Jerome.
Thank you, and yeah, it's been great to listen to all of these presentations and just see all the amazing work. But okay, yeah, can we go, please? Yep, so as you heard, Roll Safe is a public health initiative focused on creating socially responsible transport culture and helping the uptake of green transport among underrepresented groups. We deliver safety training, run community councils, deliver workshops, train organizations, and run research projects. So our team has some core partners, including early users of e-scooters, community leaders working with national organizations, social entrepreneurs, project managers, and this includes Christian Douglas, James Armstrong, myself, Jerome Sewell, and Izoza Hinkoma. So how did we begin? RollSafe launched in 2020 after Christian Douglas witnessed young people frequently using e-scooters on public roads and became alarmed at their speed and dangerousness. He onboarded myself to design and create one of the UK's first e-scooter training courses. So the initiative went full steam ahead, and from 2020 to 2022, we collaborated with e-scooter rental provider Tier App, working with 1,000 Londoners in public spaces. We joined an advisory panel with Transport for London over the e-scooter rental trials. We also worked closely with the Parliamentary Advisory Council of Transport Safety. So after the creation and piloting of our course, it quickly became apparent that if our organisation really wanted to impact road safety, then the issue would have to be tackled not just by a single course, but wider transformation of behaviour. And as a result, we moved forward with creating a public health initiative. This led us into creating different arms, which includes research, and we designed a research project with Dundee and Leicester University. We formed a community council for underrepresented groups, bringing together frontline organizations working with 4,000 Londoners. We also provided workshop delivery, e-scooter training, and video material as well. So I mean, that encompasses the wide range of work that we've engaged in over that period of time, basically. And the council itself is one of the first of its types. And yeah, we pushed forward from there. So in 2022, after searching, we found the Integrated Transport Fund, and we met two of their trustees, who made us realize that we had finally found a funder who matched our values. And from that point forward, we actually secured the grant in 2022 to deliver the following. So we trained 80 young people in community centres over the safe use of e-scooters. We created an online training tutorial for e-scooter use, reaching over 500 people and organizations through our information highway. We delivered workshops to 30 road safety officers and to over 30 delegates at an event sponsored by the Department for Transport. You're seeing one of our training courses there. Previous slides, you saw some of our other workshops. We provided consultations to senior policy advisors in the Department for Transport working on legislation. We were featured in the news papers and on BBC London News campaigning. And we published a white paper with Dundee and Leicester University. And our council held sessions with Transport for London, the Community Council. And our research was circulated to the Transport Select Committee as well. So yeah, that's a lot to swallow in terms of the range of work and all of the things that took place. But working with it was truly, was truly influential in that kind of stage and development and pushing forward with these sides of our journey. So I mean, going in really to 2023. We realized that among our services, community councils held a distinct advantage. So community councils allow for local access to people, for people to spaces, and our council became a voice for communities in London to affect change with those in position of power. In our next phase, we approached fit to launch the RollSafe National Initiative. So throughout 2023 and at the start of 2024, RollSafe built partnerships with a range of organisations across the UK, including universities in Coventry, Nottingham and Reading. Sheiks in Kent, Porch Lights in Kent, the Influencing Transport Lab in the West Midlands, councillors in Wales, and our existing partners in Dundee and Leicester, of course, were still working with us. Together, we delivered services and trained organisations to run their own services, which included delivering workshops to over 90 organisations and young people across England, which was partly about some of it campaigning over electric bike use among women, and highlighting also young people's needs. These workshops went on to be delivered at the International Cargo Bike Festival in Amsterdam and helped partners build collaborations with local authorities across England. We made a documentary featuring the organisations in Wales, Kent and Dundee. That reached 2,000 people after distribution to 30 organisations. And lastly, we created a Sustainable Transport Research Council with research centres in Nottingham, Dundee, Leicester and Reading. So what did we learn? I mean, the nature of travel barriers among particularly ethnic minority groups, and how this relates to social issues such as systemic prejudices was something that we learned greatly about. The impact of different types of interaction, whether physical or virtual, on transport habits, and the importance of marginalized voices claiming a stake in the future of transport. We have gone from a local level to a national kind of stage. And at this point in our journey, we're heading towards cementing and deepening our impacts to ensure that the seeds we have planted grow into trees. And again, we always, thank FIT actually for providing part of the springboard for all of that to come to fruition and life.
Thanks very much, Jerome, for that presentation. It's really interesting. And I'd now finally like to call on Chris Church from the Oxfordshire Roads Action Alliance, who's going to be talking about the work that Alliance has done on promoting alternatives to a housing infrastructure fund road scheme in South Oxfordshire. And Chris has been co-chair of the Alliance co-chair of the Alliance and has worked for 40 years on environmental issues. One of his first voluntary roles was the successful 1980s campaign to stop the M40 motorway going across Otmore near Oxford. And he's Director of Community Environmental Associates, specialising in work linking global and local issues. Thank you, Chris.
Well, thank you, Stephen, and good morning. And let's go. I'm here as Director of Community Environment Associates, a member of Oxford Friends Here. Sorry. And we helped set up the Oxfordshire Roads Action Alliance. Oxford is under huge pressure from housing development, and our major issue now is the HIF1 road, which I will come back to. 4 years ago, we were involved in a campaign that successfully stopped the Oxford-Cambridge Expressway. And from there, we realised that we were going to be involved in fighting road campaigns. We needed to go wider. This was our Sustainable Transport Policy Christmas card with 12 different things the council could be doing, inspired by the fact we wanted solar car chargers at the Pear Tree roundabout, which gave us the last line of 12 Days of Christmas. We thought we were making progress, and then this. This is a road, the HIF1 road it's called, going around south of Oxfordshire to connect the road to Newbury and the road to Reading, with a massive new bridge across the Thames and associated wetlands, promoted by Oxfordshire County Council. You can see where it winds there. It may look like a succession of local roads, but it has the potential to become a major trunk road, and going off to the right where you can't see it, it ends up just a few miles from the M40. Initial protests like this was actually seeing off people who'd come to survey compulsory purchase on the land just behind, made us realise that we need to work with a range of different organisations. This was largely local people and one parish council. But from there came the Oxfordshire Roads Action Alliance, which is a combination of environment groups, parish councils, and a few specialist groups, which has looked to say, okay, roads are not the answer. The county council's own transport policy states that roads are not a sustainable solution. This is one of our leaflets stressing that we need a better transport system. You've already heard about how roads are bad for climate. The county kind of tries to somehow claim that building this new road will be good for the climate, but no one believes it. We ran the usual gamut of protests, and we came to the public inquiry where the county council's planning committee heard the proposals from the county council's transport committee. And we presented a large petition. We were highlighting how the council was having to find 60 million, 30 million of that to be borrowed. And we got to a point where the planning committee turned it down, 7 votes to 2. And we were delighted. High levels of objection, and most councillors on the planning committee recognised the proposal was seriously flawed. This caused serious conniptions in Oxfordshire County Council's economic development team, and they continued to push for the road even though their own planning committee had turned it down. They got it called in by Michael Gove, and suddenly we were facing a public inquiry. And consistently, of course, they were saying there is no alternative. We've been at the public inquiry courtesy of money from the foundation. Many, many thanks for that. The inquiry is actually finishing today. It's been a difficult one. We have been seriously outgunned by the county council and many large businesses. But we have been putting a lot of our resources into saying, this is just one road, there's several others. We need a different approach. We need new development models for Oxfordshire. Oxfordshire is, as I said, under huge pressure. This is heading for 400,000 people in the area. A lot of them in the area south of Oxford, where the HIF1 road is highlighted, where we have new science parks at places like Harwell and Milton. We have a huge development around what was the small junction at Didcot. We worked closely with Create Street, new organisation who I would highly recommend, and their report on stepping off the road to nowhere was one we used for our first seminar on how we actually work with the councils and others to allow for development. The sad thing is that the county council's transport policy in many ways is very good. This is their stuff on roads and transport hubs. It's unfortunate the vast majority of their money is going on new roads. We have also been promoting rail. Oxford had half as many train stations as it did before Beeching and more than twice as many people. No surprise. This is a map from a briefing we've produced, again, thanks to the foundation. This is one of our more optimistic members. This is a metro rail system for Oxford with a number of new stations and improved services. It's a brilliant opportunity, cunningly disguised as an insoluble problem, transport. We think we can do it, and that's where we're going. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris. And thanks to all our presenters, who I think have given us lots of really interesting projects and things to talk about. There have been some questions, and we've got a little time to pick some of them up. can I ask Maya? There's a question that we've had from Lisa about whether if the council are reviewing their local plan, whether they've seen that Create Streets report that Chris just mentioned, and also a comment about the business cases for new and improved roads, the DfT ignoring traffic generation that when they widen and build roads. Maya, do you want to comment on those?
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much. So firstly, with the local plan, yeah, that's a brilliant report. I shared that widely when it came out. I don't think we put it in the local plan responses. So there was a survey which we filled out and encouraged the campaign supporters to fill out. I think we kept it to bullet points, but it was inspired by content in that report and the transport in new homes report. But yeah, we'll try and, if we are able to talk to a councillor, we'll try and pass them the link to the report so hopefully they can read it. And then with the DfT modelling, I'm aware, especially Andrew Boswell has been doing a lot of work around this with modelling for future predicted traffic growth. I think the A38 scheme does say like they predict traffic increases, and that's because it is explicitly for opening up more land near the A38 for developments and increasing road capacity. So they're quite explicit about that, and yeah, that's the main purpose of the scheme. So thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask another question that's come for Jamie from PAX? What would it take to get the Health and Safety Executive to report on road deaths caused by people at work, and what difference do you think that would make?
I'm not sure they will. They've resisted it this far, but I think there is work that can be done in that space with them involved to make it clearer on companies what their responsibilities are, and ensuring that we get some sort of prosecutions when they're failing to take those sort of safety measures that they should be. So yeah, we're going to try to make this happen, but I think they won't want to mix their the results they already have with those from road safety. But hopefully, say Stats 19, we can get that pulled out to make it clearer in there.
And do you have a sense of what difference that would make?
Well, I think basically part of the problem is companies aren't being held to account, and as soon as they are, I think there'll be massive changes. So, like I said, I think about a third of road deaths involve someone driving or riding for work. So I think the potential is massive. And if you have all commercial vehicles, say, complying with speed limits and all those things, then actually it calms down the rest of the traffic. So I think it could have sort of massive benefits.
Question for Chris. Was that scheme the result of National Highways A34 proposed widening being dropped?
Sorry, can you?
Was the HIF scheme the result of National Highways A34 proposed widening and realignment being dropped?
No, I think these are very separate. This is the HIF1 scheme, really is housing. It's about unlocking land for about 8,000 new homes. And it's going to result probably in 2,000 or 3,000 cars every morning trying to get on to the A34 as traffic expands in the area. There's a real danger of a major sprawl from Abingdon right across south of Oxfordshire towards Berrinsfield and even down to Wallingford. Yeah, it's simply the wrong solution. But no, the A34 has got its own problems, and there is investment in slip roads going on and so on.
Thank you very much. Jamie says we're working on getting the HSE to take a proactive approach. Right, I think we're just coming up to time on this. I'd like to, I think that we're going to make the slides from the presenters available through the FIT website. so people will be able to see them. And I'd like to thank all the speakers for really interesting presentations. Even as a PIT trustee, I've still been amazed. I've learned lots about some of the groups we're funding, and I hope people who've been listening to this have learned something too, and FIT will continue to fund and promote projects like this, and hopefully do more events like this, because I think this has been a rather good framework. So, and I'd like to thank Brogan, who's been running this event, for all her work in putting this together. So I hope people have enjoyed this. Thanks very much, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you.